I have a hardy kiwi that's in need of a good trellis to climb. So I decided to build a beautiful arbor. A good arbor can run you upwards of $2,000. So I decided to do some research online, find some designs that I liked, drew up a few mock-ups, and this is what I came up with. And for a fraction of the price, I was able to get all of these materials to build this arbor for just over $100. So grab your tools and I'll show you how to build this one step by step. This is my hardy kiwi that I got from a local master gardener sale a few years ago. And I recently moved it from right here to right there. And the reason being is because I just finished renovating our brand new chicken coop, and it was just growing up along the nesting boxes, and it was making it really hard for me to access. But also you can see where the sun is right now, it's kind of shaded. So I decided to move it here in order to promote its health and productivity for the future. And now that I'm going to be building this trellis, it's going to be able to just grow up beautifully and just sprawl across the trellis or the arbor over this roofing here. And as I'm walking out every single day to grab our chicken eggs, I'll be able to just see this beautiful kiwi plant growing overhead and eventually even just be picking off these kiwis off the arbor. Whenever I'm doing a project, I always try to be as efficient as I can with the material. And most lumber comes in 8-foot sections. So I'm gonna try to make this arbor about 4 feet wide, so that way I can minimize the amount of waste that I create. The first thing that I wanna do is put these rafters on, the pieces that are gonna come and stick out off the top. Because what I want and what I've typically seen from designs that I've looked up is that there's typically a 3-inch overhang or so over that front beam. So I'm gonna cut those first, and then we'll do all of the math to figure out how long the rest of our lumber needs to be to create the ideal size of the arbor. So these are my rafters, and I'm using 2x2s. I cut them perfectly in half, so they're about 48 inches long or 4 feet. Now, what I'm going to be doing is butting these up against the existing post and then installing another post here and then having the beam on front. And as I said, my goal is to have this overhang about 3 inches. So since I'm gonna have a 3-inch overhang, then a beam that's 1.5 inches thick, and then a post that's 3.5 inches thick, I'll have a 40-inch gap from one post to the other. So I'm going to be cutting 4 2x4 pieces that are 40-inch long, so that way I can attach one post to the next. One thing to note, if you're making a freestanding arbor, your dimensions are going to be a little bit different because I'm only going to be having an overhang on one side for my rafters. If you're going to have a freestanding arbor, you're mostly likely going to have 2 beams, one on the front and one on the back, and you're going to have overhangs on either side. So if you have a post and a beam on the front and the back, cut your 2x4 pieces to 32 inches, vice 40 inches, and then all of this will fit perfectly together. All right, so I got my 2x4s cut. And another thing I did was add in these pocket holes, which I'm going to use to attach this 2x4 to each of the posts. And I love using the Craig jig to make these pocket holes. It makes a really strong joint and it makes a nice clean and finished look. So if you don't use a Craig jig and you do a lot of construction or wood building projects, I definitely recommend you check them out, and I'll put a link in the description below. I wanted to do this portion first because what I'm gonna do is dig a couple holes in order to put my posts into the ground to anchor them and make the structure a little bit more rigid. So now that I know exactly how far away my posts need to be, I can get to digging. I'm gonna lay out 2 of my 2x4s coming off of the posts where I'm gonna attach them to, just to make sure that I'm putting the holes in the right place. And one thing I would really recommend that you do as well is measure from corner to corner. This is going to make sure that you actually have a rectangle in this case, and it's perfectly square, so that way when you install your posts, everything is going to fit up really well. And remember, before you start digging, make sure you call 811 so your local utilities can come out and spray where your utilities are ran, so that way you don't hit them and damage your utilities or potentially hurt yourself in the process. The post holes are dug, and they don't need to be extremely deep. These are about, let's say, I'm gonna say 18 inches or so. They're about 14 inches deep. But these aren't taking load like a fence would normally be, where you want the post hole to be at least 2 feet deep. These are really to just keep the post in the correct position and get them more anchored into the ground. You could certainly assemble this all together and just like set it in place, and it probably won't budge, especially after you have plants and things growing up it that are going to help to anchor it even further in position. But I like to put these at least a foot deep just to make sure that my posts are going to stay in position. And now I'm gonna get my 4x4 posts, put them in the holes, and make sure everything looks right. Just gonna get these stood up in the holes. And we're gonna make a few more measurements just to make sure that these are good. And I'm not going to fill these holes in until I have all of my lumber attached, so that way I know that these posts are in the perfect positions in order to support the structure as well as look aesthetically pleasing. Even with them leaning, you could tell that this post is a little bit taller than this one. What I'm going to do is take a level and make a level line from my existing post here to this post over here and cut off the top. So that way I have a nice flush surface across the top, which my beam is going to sit in front of. And that's going to make a really good, clean, finished look. And then you don't have to worry about making the holes the perfect depth in order for them to be perfectly level. So I'm going to install my first 2x4 cross brace. And what I want to do is make sure that I'm installing it on the inside of the 4x4, like so. And the reason being is because we're going to create a nice lattice structure on this side for the plant to be able to climb up. And whenever I am working with exterior lumber, make sure that you use a decking screw, which is rated for pressure treated one, which is what I'm using, so that way it's going to last the longest. And it's also rated for the exterior conditions. If you use an interior construction screw, the thing is just going to rust away in the matter of months, and then your structure might fall apart within the first year. So make sure you invest in a good decking screw, and I'm using 2.5 inches. You could use 3 inches as well. Got our decking screws and our pocket holes, and we're gonna attach this right here. And if you need a helping hand, don't be afraid to ask for one. I kind of struggle to do that sometimes. Now that I've got my 2x4 beam that's going to attach my two posts together installed to my first post, I could take my level, place it on top, and also bring the new beam that I just put into the hole and get it aligned to where I want it to live, just like this. And I want to make sure that it's level, but it also looks good. Looking good always takes precedence over being level, especially in a structure like this. It's not like we're putting together a house. So put your level on and make sure you have a good line. And I'm gonna play around with it until I get my bubble right in position. Now that I know where level is, I'm going to just make a mark on my 4x4, and that'll tell me where I need to cut it off. I've got both 4x4s cut. Get those sunk in. Now don't be overly critical with making the perfectly level cut at the top of this 4x4. We're still gonna have a beam that goes across the whole front here, and as long as that looks good from the front and it's relatively level, that's all that really matters at the end of the day. So now I'm gonna get this beam in position, align my 2x4, so that way it's flush with the top, and then we'll finish up the edge here. Again, make sure when you're installing this 2x4 to your 4x4 that it's on the inside here, so that way we can install the lattice structure on the outside. Just look at how nice and flush this joint looks. And the pocket hole screws, again, they just make such beautiful joints here. This is really starting to come together. Next thing we're gonna do is install the other 2x4 beam at the bottom here, about a foot off the ground. For these bottom 2x4 braces, I think I want to put them about, I don't know, probably a foot off of the ground, just because there's no really lower branches on this kiwi plant here. Most of them are up toward the top. So the way the bottom of our trellis will start around here, and then they'll be able to grab on to the structure that we're going to create and climb all the way to the top. So I'm going to get this side installed first, since I marked it here. All right, and now I'm going to get the level again to get it level going this way. So now, this is the reason why I didn't fill in this hole yet. I'm going to pull this in. That looks good right there. There we go. Get this one attached. And now we have a much more rigid structure. Now measuring down from the top here, we're about 55 1/4. Should be the same on both sides. Yep. So 55 1/4. So I'm just going to measure down from this side on the front here, do the exact same thing, go 55 1/4, and that's where I'm going to attach this second beam across the back here, so that way in the front they're both the exact same height. It's really starting to take shape and it looks amazing. But before I fill in these holes, I want to install this beam on the front, which is going to lock everything in place. That way we can make sure everything works well before we finalize the foundation of the structure. I've got a 2x8 beam here and it's 10 feet long, and since our arbor is about 8 feet wide, I wanted to have some overhang on each end, which is why I chose a 10-foot option. What I'm going to do is create a nice little natural curve here, just to put my own, you know, little art into it. And I'm just going to make a template with a piece of cardboard, so that way I can apply the exact same curve on both sides. So I really wanted to start, I don't know, about 2 inches off the top here ish, just to leave a little bit of space at the top, and then I want it to like curve naturally down. And I drew this up already to some degree, and I want it to be about 14 inches into 14 and a half inches into my piece of lumber here, because we have plenty of space on either end. And now I'm just going to do a nice continuous little curve here, and we can doctor this up to make it look perfect. We're going to transfer that onto our cardboard, cut it out, and now we have a template. Get this in a good position and transfer this line. There we go. Now you could certainly cut this with a handsaw, but using a jigsaw is going to make quick work. Beautiful, look at that. Now I'm ready to install the beam, and I want to make sure that it's perfectly centered in between these two posts. So I'm going to mark the center on my beam, and then all I did was measure out half of this distance and then make a line so I know exactly where it's going to lie on this post. If you've got them, go get yourself some clamps or get someone's help, because you're going to need some assistance getting the beam in the right position before we actually attach them to the posts. So what I did was actually took the beam back down and pre-drilled a pilot hole, so that way I can get at least one screw in to seal this into position, and that way it's going to make it a lot easier for me to position the other side. So I got the beam into position, but there is a slight problem. It is really low. My head almost touches this. So I think what I'm going to do is move it up at least a few inches, and I think that's going to be better overall, because I don't want someone that's taller than me coming and smacking their head on this by accident. So I've got to move it up just a little bit more. Luckily, I only made one hole so far, so it shouldn't be that big a deal. But I think also pushing this up is going to make it look a lot better overall, just like more grand. Since it's so wide, the taller I can push the top of this arbor up, I think it's going to make it look super nice. So I wanted to bring it up about an inch or two, which isn't a lot, but it's enough to raise it up, so that way I'm not hitting my head on it walking underneath. You can certainly make yours a lot taller, but I wanted mine to go flush with the existing structure, which is why it's this height. Now that I've got my beam attached with only one screw, I'm going to get my posts nice and level and make sure that they're looking good. I'm just gonna go on the front and the side of the post and make sure that it's level and knock it into position before I fill up my holes with the soil. The next thing that we're going to do is install a lattice structure on both sides of the arbor. This will give something for the plants to climb up. So what I'm going to use are these furring strips. They're about a couple bucks a piece. For this portion, I'm gonna be using 1 5/8 stecking screws, and make sure every time you screw into this furring strip, you're pre-drilling the holes because it's much more likely for this to split than a 2x4. And I already cut them down, but the way that I made the cuts, first I want to put a piece that's going to attach to the 4x4 post in between my 2x4s. So I measure the distance between my 2x4s, and I made 4 of those, which are going to sit right here. Now that I've got these furring strips installed attached to this 4x4, I'm going to use it as a ledge in order to install these horizontal strips, just like this. What I want to do is space them out evenly. So I'm going to measure this space and divide it by 5. Since I'll have 4 of these strips, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll get them evenly spaced out. And in order to attach these vertical pieces like this, I'm going to install 2 more horizontal pieces, one across this 2x4 right here, and one across the 2x4 at the bottom, and then we'll have a nice lattice structure. To get the spacing for the vertical pieces, I just measured the distance here and put a mark exactly halfway. Then I split the difference again in the middle between here, and same thing over here. So now I'll have 3 lattice pieces evenly spaced to finish the structure. Just look how good that looks. I'm really, really happy with this so far. The very last thing I need to do is put the rafters on top. I'm gonna install 9 rafters evenly spaced. I'm gonna start by putting 1 on each end and 1 in the middle, and then I'll do the exact same thing I did with the lattice or the furring strips, just cut it in half until I'm happy with the spacing. It looks amazing. I am so happy with this build. For $100, we were able to make this beautiful arbor that our hardy kiwi is going to absolutely love. I just can't wait to see it start climbing up this arbor over the roof, and maybe even taking over the roof of our chicken run, and eventually seeing hundreds potentially of kiwi just floating underneath of here as we walk into the chicken coop. I am just really, really happy with the way that this turned out. And I hope you enjoyed this build, and it is encouraging for you that you can go out to the big box stores and buy typical lumber and create a beautiful arbor for literally thousands of dollars less than the ones that you can find in the stores or online. And you can do it with relatively simple tools as well. And hey, maybe this is an excuse for you to buy some tools that you've been wanting, because you're saving money buying the $100 or $200 worth of tools to build a $100 arbor that you're now going to use over and over again to build even more projects around the homestead. My name is Phil from Earth, Nails, and Tails. I really hope you enjoyed this build. Go build an arbor of your own, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.